of the first All India Conference of East Asian Studies, organized by the Institute of Chinese Studies and the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies, Shiv Nadar University. The theme of this session is Transforming Strategic Order in East Asia, Regional Developments and National Responses. Our first speaker for this session is Prashant Kumar Singh, Associate Fellow, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. He will be speaking on Taiwan's external relations amidst international and regional strategic flux. Our second speaker is Avinash Anil Godbole, Associate Professor and Assistant Academic Dean, Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat. Dr. Godbole will be speaking on the topic, China's Evolving East Asian Strategy, Domestic Imperatives. Our third speaker for the session is Dr. Titli Basu. She is an Associate Fellow at the East Asian Center at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. She will be looking at reimagining Japan's role in East Asian security. Our final speaker, also the panel convener for the session, is Dr. Jojin V. John. He's a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs of East Asia, focusing on Korean Peninsula and Japan. Dr. John will be speaking on the topic South Korea and the East Asian Regional Order Transition, the quest for strategic autonomy. The chair for this session is Srabani Rao Choudhury, Professor, Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She is an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Prior to joining Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2007, she was a faculty in International Management Institute. She has been a recipient of Japan Foundation Fellowship, Visiting Scholar Program at Kazai Kuhu Center, Ministry of Economics and Industry, Japan, Policy Research Institute, Ministry of Finance, Japan, a visiting fellow at a Research Institute for Economic and Business Administration, Kobe University, and Graduate School of Development Studies, Nagoya University. Before I invite the panel convener to begin the proceedings, let me lay out the housekeeping rules. All participants, except for the speaker, shall be muted for the duration of the event. Participants are requested to send in their questions via the chat box or use the raise hand option. Please unmute yourself only when called to do so by the chair. I will now invite Dr. Jojin V. John to begin the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Srabani. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Thank you, ICEAS team and Shiv Nadar University for providing this platform. As mentioned, aim of the panel is to understand how East Asian countries are responding to the tectonic geopolitical and strategic shift in East Asian order. Today we have with us Professor Srabani Rao Choudhury, Professor East Asian Studies, to chair the session. Ma'am, kindly, the floor is yours. Kindly conduct the proceeding.
Thank you, Jojin John. Thank you, ICS and Shiv Nadar, for this excellent opportunity for young scholars as well as other special sessions that you have created with other panelists. I'm also thankful to Srabani for the hosting this particular session as being the co-host, and Georgie for convening this session. The subject, Transforming Strategic Order in East Asia, Regional Development and National Response, says when we initially formulated this, we did not have the Ukraine crisis in place. So I'm sure the current speakers would be probably focusing on the Ukraine crisis and therefore the more tectonic changes that we are expecting in the East Asian order. We had today as the inaugural speaker, Taro Kuno, giving us huge directions of what Japan plans to move in the current scenario. And I'm sure today's discussion that we're going to have on this particular subject would be enthralling for the audience who are listening in. For people in the panel, you people are already well versed in the subject and are, I always say, the middle rung managers of the security conundrum that one's facing in the East Asian order. I will therefore not spend much time introducing the subject, nor will I spend time, thankfully, to Surabhi. She's introduced all of them. So over to you, Prashant. You can start your talk, but remember we have only 10 minutes, and that is
no problem. Thank you.
as a chair.
So is my screen, my presentation is visible?
Yes, it is visible. If you want to make it into full screen, you can do that too, Prashant.
It's not possible. Yeah.
It is.
Is it moving?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Since the history of cross-state relations is well known, I would come to the main point straight away. And therefore I have prepared my PPT also, so that all of you can relate to what I am speaking here from here. The immediate backdrop of the present phase in cross-state relations is the period from 2008 to 2016. This 8-year-long period under President Maing from the KMT in Taiwan, that was corresponded by the second tenure of President Hu Jintao and the first term of President Xi Jinping in China, was the best period in the Taiwan Strait from the point of view of peace, stability, and cross-strait cooperation in economic and cultural ties. Yet, Taiwanese society remained apprehensive about the eventual outcome of the fast-paced cooperation, cross-state cooperation, as to whether Taiwan will suck into unification with China in the process. This sentiment and governance-related dissatisfaction brought Tsai Ing-wen from the DPP, Democratic People's Party, to power in 2016. The promising picture of cross-state ties completely changed after this point. Relations have seen a massive reversal in the political arena, if not in the economic. The security strategic situation has increasingly become fragile. The reason is that the DPP categorically refuses to adhere to the 1992 consensus or the One China principle in its any semantic form, whereas China wants an unequivocal endorsement of the 1992 consensus for treating the DPP government as a legitimate dialogue partner. As a consequence, China suspended all cross-state dialogue mechanisms in every format, in official, semi-official, on 25th June 2016. And since then, there has been no official or semi-official contact between the two sides. In fact, the relations have touched its all-time low, and the tension, strain, and aberration in relations have been felt, have been seen and observed in many ways, in many forms, and in many arenas, and some of which I have listed for you on this slide. On the other hand, in keeping with the DPP's policy and program, the Tsai government has been quietly promoting a Taiwanese national identity. And some of the examples I have listed here, that he has been whenever she had the opportunity, she introduced herself as President of Taiwan, not Republic of China, during her foreign visits. Another example is that the cover page of the Taiwanese passport has been changed, in which the Republic of China in the English text has been dropped, though in Chinese language it is very much there. These are just examples. The point is that, so in a nutshell, cross-state relations are seeing and witnessing a full-fledged rhetorical war and subversive activities of every kind, of many kinds. And some of the incidents are actually a Cold War replay. When we have followed this cross-state relations in 7 years, so many activities do remind the things and actions from the Cold War. And I have listed all about this, how Chinese nationals have been apprehended under espionage charge in China, and how Chinese espionage network alleged espionage network has been busted one after another in Taiwan. And the repercussions are not only being felt in the bilateral relations, but in the domestic society also, such as Taiwan's Anti-Infiltration Act that is being castigated and criticized from within the Taiwanese society. Because the accusation is that this law has the potential to victimize ordinary Taiwanese people who have legitimate and understandable professional interest in China. So this is the general situation that has happened that has developed in last 6 or 7 years. So the serious most challenge that is coming from China is unabated military posturing to threaten Taiwan, which shows signs of preparation for a real military struggle. The numbers of the instances of grey zone conflicts triggered by the PLA have increased drastically. The violation of Taiwanese airspace and carrying out maneuvers around Taiwan by the PLA Air Force has become a daily business with newer and higher counts. Naval drills around Taiwan too have become a regular phenomenon. These are not merely search and rescue exercises. Their focus is very much on surveillance. Sighting of Chinese drones over Taiwan is a regular occurrence. Military infrastructure building by the PLA opposite Taiwanese shore is also noted. In the meantime, the fate of Hong Kong has increased Taiwan's resolve to reject the one country, two systems that China offers to it. Taiwan has been describing this formula as a deadly and poisonous embrace, and the developments in Hong Kong in 2019 June onwards have validated Taiwan's position and increased Taiwan's resolve to reject this formula. On its part, China has accused Taiwan of instigating the turmoil in coordination with the US in Hong Kong that basically erupted in June 2019 onwards. So every available indicator tells that cross-strait chasm has only increased, and the DPP's position on cross-strait affairs appears to have become mainstream political position in Taiwan, and there are indications that the KMT is also coming around DPP's position. In its recent party report, it has been accused that the recent study of the KMT party has basically diluted its commitment for the 1992 consensus, and this development is being interpreted as it is coming around the DPP's position. So that's why I am saying that the charge has just increased, and that has come around the DPP's position on cross-strait affairs. The geostrategic side of the cross-strait tussle is that it has completely coincided with a sharp deterioration in Sino-US relations. What all happened in the Sino-US relations during the Trump presidency is well known. What needs to be reminded here is that Taiwan greatly benefited during this period in terms of arms purchases from the US, vocal support from the highest levels of the US government, and the US reaffirmation of Taiwan's importance for the US. And some of the instances I have highlighted here, which we can discuss in the question answer session also. And when it comes to Biden, so the details I have given in my slide, in the nutshell, I would tell that Taiwan is underlined as the area where policy continuation is uninterrupted under President Biden. He has not only held the line set by Trump, but has stepped up the fresh investment in relations also. There have been instances when Biden, in fact, has appeared to be pushing a new alignment around Taiwan. The countries such as Japan and South Korea, which were generally reticent about the Taiwan affairs, Taiwan issue, they have become vocal on the Taiwan issue, and of course in support of Taiwan. And Australia I have not mentioned here. You can include Australia in the list of these countries also, which have it, and of course then the European Union also. So the point is, it seems that the point I have made that it seems in certain instances, Biden appeared to be pushing a new alignment around Taiwan. In the meantime, however, two significant events have happened. First, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and it virtually handing over power to the Taliban, which was highlighted as evidence of the US unreliability. Many saw this withdrawal as a warning sign for Taiwan. In fact, President Biden and his high officials felt compelled to issue clarifications and underscore the fundamental difference between Afghanistan and Taiwan for the US. In general, any immediate challenge or implication for Taiwan of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was not seen. However, the Ukraine crisis might be a different case. This is only commonsensical that the PLA must be monitoring the lack of a robust military response from NATO to defend Taiwan. While NATO has no treaty obligation to defend it, you must be monitoring the lack of a robust military response from NATO to defend Ukraine. While NATO has no treaty obligation to defend Ukraine, so does not have the US to defend Taiwan. After all, the US-Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 is only a political commitment to its own Congress and people, not to Taiwan. And in fact, the media reports that have been leaked in recent months raises concerns about the Democrats' approach towards Taiwan in the coming years, in the coming period.
To wind up.
Yeah, I'm winding up, but just, yeah. So the global strategic scenario has changed fast, and it is testing the US commitments everywhere. This is a real concern for Taiwan. As China has far greater and far deeper stakes in the international community, its invasion of Taiwan is still unlikely. Yet one cannot overlook the nature of Xi Jinping's leadership and the fact that concerted voices that it is about time that a final settlement of the Taiwan question should be done has increased in China. The Chinese are pointedly asking that Taiwan is our core interest. What is it for you? We are ready to die for it, but what will make you to die for it? So I would say that the US much celebrated strategic ambiguity worked well when the Taiwan state was calm and peaceful. It may not hold if China were to emulate the Russian example of invading Ukraine unless ambiguous words are met with solid actions. If the US has serious interest in Taiwan's democratic future, either it should contribute to calming down the heat in the Taiwan Strait politically through political and diplomatic measures, or it should move towards some sort of strategic clarity in favor of Taiwan. Well, all these scholarly, as for all these scholarly suggestions, everything is easier said than done, but the ground situation now indeed appears to be changing, and this is testing time for Taiwan. There are lots of domestic political issues, regional situation, and of course, global strategic situation is contributing to the present cross-state relations that is making the present state of cross-state relations very, very vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. I think you've taken us through the trajectory of Taiwan's resolve to be a state in itself. Over to you, Avinash. He is going to be looking at the domestic imperative China faces with respect to the evolving Asian strategy, East Asian strategy. Over to you, Avinash.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Jojin. Thank you, ICS, for inviting me in this session. I also like to thank my own university and Ashoka University as well. In fact, part of this presentation today is part of my fellowship work of China-India Visiting Scholars Fellowship. And I'm working on dual circulation strategy and its implications at home and abroad for China. I had given a title on China's evolving East Asia strategy and domestic imperatives. But like ma'am mentioned in the beginning, we gave this title in December, and we are in a different place now. It's a kind of different world after the invasion of Ukraine, and it has altered several perceptions as well on what is going to happen or likely to happen in East Asia. I'll apologize right in the beginning that my presentation might look a little bit all over the place because it's a work in progress. So today I'll not talk on the strategy per se that will emerge, I hope, by the end of my presentation, or the questions can emerge, but I'll focus strictly on the drivers. And I'm going to look at three categories of drivers as far as China's present and future East Asia strategy the new trends that is I'm noticing. Let me list those three first and then get into those in detail. First of all, the dual circulation strategy itself and how it might impact Japan and South Korea in the short term and in the long term, and how has been the commentary from the region on this, in fact, up till Singapore, because it's quite interesting. Second, the post-COVID situations and what has happened because of post-COVID. I have been particularly interested in looking at the status versus power question in China's foreign policy strategy. For a long time, China was responding to the question of China being a responsible stakeholder, but by the time it started constructing the artificial islands in the South China Sea, it had got out of that mindset. So that status versus power line, it seems to have crossed. The other point of looking at foreign policy of China in Asia, I have worked on this previously and written a bit, not published in the process, but I have noticed the three phases of China's foreign policy in Asia. First is capabilities, trying to improve economically and strategically. Second is building of power based on those capabilities. And the third, the phase in which we were supposed to be now, is influence. But for influence to work, you also need followers. You also need the ability to create norms before the norms become accepted. The Belt and Road Initiative was supposed to be that sort of a norm building exercise, but it has not worked, as we know. And the third driver is the upcoming Party Congress and China's desire for a stable security environment and a moment of strategic opportunity. I looked through the speeches, the New Year speech of Mangi's as well as the presidents, but I did not see this term mentioned as clearly as it has been mentioned previously. So a little bit on that. So dual circulation strategy, I already did a presentation just last week, so and many of you did attend, has drivers, domestic as well as external drivers. The external drivers are quite clear: the global economic slowdown, deglobalization and protectionism, and the long-term strategy of protectionism that China experiences. So external circulation, foreign trade is no more going to be the central driver of China's economy. That is kind of the accepted norm. And that's why you need a little, some diversification. Second, it's also a continuity from the policies of Hu Jintao era, the inequalities that were faced. There's a desire to increase consumption domestically and spread it better within across the provinces. There's a long held wish list to create domestic, to stop the domestic barriers to internal trade. Provincial protectionism is a problem in China, and several, at least two presidents previously have also attempted, and Xi Jinping also attempting to break those down, making several sectors more viable: banking, housing, infrastructure building. All of these have been drivers. It's obviously not a standalone policy. It fits in place with Made in China 2025, dual circulation, 14th Five-Year Plan, the science and technology strategy, and the common prosperity that was announced previously. And let me come to the reactions and impacts on East Asia and the rest of the world. I'm looking, as part of my project, I'm also looking at the external reactions to dual circulation strategy. And there's a marked difference between how East Asia has responded and how the Europeans have responded. In short, Europeans have had more alarmed reactions to dual circulation, but more positive commentary is seen about dual circulation, that it will create more opportunities for businesses in the future, in the short term, but in the long term, with the desire to create Chinese local brands and pushing them in the top 100, especially in the consumer sector, in the electronics, but also in food and cosmetics. Actually, I was interested in knowing why cosmetics was given such a stress, but while doing a research for this paper, it became quite clear. So it will have, in fact, cosmetics is one of the major Japanese brands, Japanese sales in China. it has been for several years, and the cosmetics businesses have had a up and down kind of opportunity over the last 2 years as the Chinese shoppers have gone online in the COVID era. So it does have implications externally, and how China is trying to sell dual circulation to the foreign countries. That is part of my paper. That is something that I'm writing on how it is projecting dual circulation as an opportunity for external actors with growing businesses and growing consumer base as well within China. So there are those sorts of consequences nonetheless in the long term with the rise of Chinese technological giants, potential technological giants, and how it's going to affect the businesses and innovation and copyrights and strategies of the businesses from Japan and Korea. The second point, in the COVID era, the Japanese brands in China, they have, like I mentioned, had their fortunes going up and down. And I looked at the status market, some data on the growing and declining market share of popular brands like Uniqlo or Muji, or the kind of Chinese imitation coming through products and brand placing like Miniso, for example. That's a concern for Japanese businesses as well. I'm sure the rest of the panel knows on this in more detail than I can detail on. I also was following curiously how the postponed and then cancelled visit of Xi Jinping's to Japan that was supposed to happen in April of 2020, and then it kept getting postponed, obviously because of COVID, and how the negative perceptions created by COVID led to popular opposition through. I also saw at least 2 newspaper polls whether Xi Jinping should visit Japan in 2022, and most popular opinion was no. And especially since we discussed, given the Ukraine crisis and how starkly opposing stance that Japan and China have taken, I'm sure if such a poll was taken today, the negative voters are going to be increasing. So China's desire for seeking leadership and that influence part of its foreign policy is not working, and China's foreign policy strategy in Asia is likely to focus on that influence bit a little bit longer, along with the stability in Asia or the Asian order kind of language again that will come. I was also kind of the opinion that, I had that perception that China might use the Ukraine crisis as a moment of opportunity and reach out a little more better to Japan, to India, or to look at issues in a different way. It might even be happening in the backdrop. But just today morning, you might have seen a statement by Le Yucheng, who was a former ambassador in India, that he compared Ukraine situation to Indo-Pacific, that all the problems are because of external intervention, specifically as such. I think he kind of said that Indo-Pacific mirrors Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine today can happen in Indo-Pacific tomorrow, or something to that effect. So again, to me, this is a continuation of that rule for your strategy, blaming everything bad on the external forces. You also saw this in the. I'm going to finish it in a minute, ma'am. In a minute. I'm also going to highlight or draw your attention to the text of the meeting that Xi Jinping had with Biden, and everything that Xi Jinping, the Chinese readout says is in the form of complaint that Biden government has not done enough to restore the relations with China, etc. So this aggressive perception and aggressive strategy is continuing of complaining to external actors and external powers as such. And third, self-explanatory, obviously the party congress and the seeking positive atmosphere and seeking peaceful external environment is going to be one of the strategies. Obviously, I did not go into the details of this, But again, once again, thank you for giving me this chance, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Avinash. Sorry, we can take a few during the question and answer session, I'm sure. Over to you, Dr. Basu. You're going to be talking to us on Japan. So we have 2 China paper followed by Japan. I think it'll get interesting
now. Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Right. So a very good afternoon to all of you. And I would like to congratulate AICEAS and also Shiv Nadar University for pursuing this brilliant idea of All India Conference on East Asian Studies. So since we are at the fag end of a very productive and yet very long day, I'll keep it really short. What I intend to do is to decode the nuanced domestic debate in Japan as it is kind of reimagining its role in East Asian security. As I think throughout the day, we have discussed that we are at a critical juncture in international history. The geopolitics and geoeconomics is fractured not just in Asia, but also in Europe. And my remarks today is basically structured in 3 parts. To contextualize the discussion today, I will first map the security landscape that Japan is navigating, and then kind of flag briefly why defense planners in Tokyo are undertaking a major relook at their options. And third, I'll try to cull out some of the choices and the scenarios that are emerging in the security conversation in Tokyo today. So I essentially argue that Japan is manifesting a refreshing confidence, drawing from its resolve to push the agenda of positive pacifism. The aim is to determine a favorable strategic balance in the Indo-Pacific. It rejects a Sino-centric regional order, and the priority will be on external and internal balancing. Japan, being an ardent advocate of a rules-based order, I believe that it will step up and kind of collaborate with allies beyond the traditional hub and spoke model that it has followed, and kind of bring its capacities to deliver global public goods in the post-COVID world. So coming to the first part of my remarks today, let's do a quick security scan, and I concur with all my fellow panelists that the situation completely changed from when I gave the title. Anyway, so when Prime Minister Kishida assumed office last October, I think Russian invasion of Ukraine was not in his strategic calculations. And his mind was probably preoccupied with Taiwan, East China Sea, and Pyongyang. But as the conflict started unfolding in end of February, the discourse has raised alarm, the Japanese discourse, on what message it will bring to Asia. And he has been very resolute in his articulation that tolerating use of force in altering status quo will have an impact in Asia. And in fact, his foreign minister, Hayashi, has also echoed that outcome in Europe will have influence in other people's calculations in Asia. Now, when I look at the internal conversation of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, I think none of us have missed the interesting comments coming from former Prime Minister Abe calling for debating the nuclear sharing option with the United States. And beyond Abe, I think, again, the foreign affairs director within the party, Masahisa Sato-san, has also been a little nervous about, rejection of Washington's rejection by Washington to militarily intervene in Ukraine. And he has kind of raised question in one of the TV debates that I was seeing last week about, what will be US response in case Japan, as and when Japan has to take on China. Again, coming to public opinion polls, I think Japanese media indicates that there are worries about Taiwan spillover. Now, the larger question about whether the parallels can be drawn between Ukraine and the Taiwan contingency is itself a very heated academic debate, because Chinese narrative has rejected such analysis and holds that it's the very nature of the two is different, given Taiwan is an internal issue. Now, further complicating the situation is the emerging China-Russia nexus, and we have seen that Russian ships are near Japan. There is exercises in Sea of Okhotsk in the contested islands. Defense minister has said that all Russia is trying to do is to demonstrate that they can handle simultaneously both the Western Front and the Eastern Front. Now, Chinese gray zone operations, I think it's an informed audience, so I'll not get into it, but we all know that Taiwan is a core project of President Xi Jinping, and the military balance is kind of shifting in Western Pacific, so it's important to avoid miscalculations. And bringing in strategic clarity vis-a-vis Taiwan is kind of gaining momentum in Tokyo, and it's not just in the defense white paper of last year or the US-Japan 2+2 meetings, but also, as I said, the internal political discussion, whether it is Abe or Kishi or Aso or even Takaichi Sanae, they're all shaping the narrative that Taiwan contingency is an Japan emergency given the proximity. And thus we have seen the party-to-party interaction, kind of deepening. Now, if we throw into the mix, North Korea's relentless pursuit of nuclear and ballistic missile weapons program, it's not a very comfortable situation. And East Asia, if we look at the larger trends, it does have, toxic history. Cold War structures are in place. There are nuclear powers. There is rising nationalism. So it's a very difficult environment to navigate. Coming to the second part of my remarks, I think this 2022 is a decisive year for Tokyo because we all know they are revising the 2013 National Security Strategy and a set of other important defense documents. So run up to it, we have seen, intense discussion on key issues, whether it is about doubling defense budget or the conversation on enemy base strike capabilities. So how they rewire the NSS is a space to watch in the coming months. And this is essentially because the strategic environment has completely changed since 2013. This current existing NSS it predates the US-China strategic competition and the pandemic itself. So as kind of Beijing advances its naval and air power, and there's hardly any tangible progress in the denuclearization. So there is no room for strategic ambivalence or miscalculations for Tokyo. And also Tokyo has its own internal problems in terms of, post-COVID economic resources, demographic dilemma, constitutional limitations, alliance management. So there are a lot of challenges on the high table. Now, coming to the third part of my remarks today, I think Japan is at the forefront of East Asian security, and what are its options? I think 2 or 3 dominant themes that come up. First is the nuclear option. We all know that Japan has 3 non-nuclear principles. In 1967, it adopted not to possess, produce, or permit introduction of nuclear weapons. But in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, we are seeing interesting comments coming in. Again, former Prime Minister Abe, who's also heading one of the largest factions within the Liberal Democratic Party, has suggested that Japan should consider hosting US nuclear weapons. And the chairman of the General Council, Fukuda-san, has also indicated that he's open to frank debate. So is LDP policy chief Sanae Takaichi-san. So if we take a step back and look at the history, I think the government has maintained that possessing nuclear weapons is not unconstitutional. When I think we all remember when Abe was the deputy chief cabinet secretary in 2002, he articulated the same position. I think Aso in 2006 again echoed the same. Now, post-war Japan has weighed its nuclear option. They have done cost-benefit analysis right after Chinese nuclear test in the 60s. And the 3 non-nuclear principles do coexisted with the secret deal between Nixon and Prime Minister Sato about permitting reintroduction of nuclear weapons in Okinawa. So the nuclear allergy also is positioned within the extended deterrence. Now, will Japan go nuclear in case there is no extended deterrence from the United States, given their technological competence and the stockpile of plutonium? May not be the case, because I think there are 3 important variables which shape their decision. One is their identity. They have spent a lot of diplomatic capital on their identity as a pacifist nation. Also, their commitment towards non-proliferation and disarmament. And I think realistic security calculations, because the region will not respond well. And it may also rock the US-Japan security alliance. Now, moving to the second, alliance security dilemma, I think this ironclad defense pledges that we see do exist alongside the security dilemma of abandonment and entrapment dynamics. So, on the one hand, as a secondary power in the alliance framework, fears of abandonment is prevalent in Japan. It has been through the Cold War and post-Cold War era, and now U.S. entrapment concerns in East China Sea, given the high cost of a military confrontation with China, is also another reality. So, though things have improved since Trump's, insular America first approach, I think alliance management is a delicate job, and Japan will, I think.
I'd like you to wind up, please.
Right, I'll take a minute. It will continue to incrementally step up its contribution as towards the alliance as a top priority, with the intention of averting such abandonment. Coming to normalization debate, I think normalization often is misrepresented or misunderstood as remilitarization. It essentially implies enabling Japan to contribute in the international peacekeeping activities. And Ozawa's seminal work on Blueprint of New Japan is quite useful for that. Coming to the last point of maximizing autonomy, this is a far-right position, and they do lack trust in the US commitment to protect Japan under Article 5. So they support rearming, full rearmamentation of Japan. Nevertheless, in the current strategic environment, I think given the cost and the challenges of attaining security, the best option remains bolstering alliance with the United States. In conclusion, I'll just say that Japan opposes the rise of a Sino-centric regional order, and being a beneficiary of the US-led system, it will continue to buttress that order, even if the balance of power is shifting. One important point as Japan reorients its exclusive difference-oriented post-war security posture is that how East Asian neighbor reacts to it. That will also determine the regional security, situation. They often argue that Japan aims to accomplish or remilitarization, which is why they are faking or manufacturing an external threat. So going ahead, I'll wrap up by saying that we are keenly waiting to see Tokyo's new national security strategy, and the priority will be to reorient the defense posture in close coordination with Washington, also with the Quad powers, ASEAN, and partners from the Europe in pursuit of keeping the strategic space of Indo-Pacific free and open. So I'll end here and look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. I presume with such a big canvas that you've opened up, you would be inundated with a lot of questions. Over to you, Jojin, for your paper on South Korea and its strategic autonomy question.
Thank you, ma'am. At the outset, I will also join my fellow panelists to thank ICS and Shivnada for giving this opportunity to have this panel. My presentation, I've also slightly changed from my initial topic in the sense that, I tried to update the debate about Korea's strategic outlet against the background of the recent South Korean presidential election. So the intensification of the US-China strategic rivalry has emerged to become one of the most significant factors determining South Korea's strategic outlook, along with the security challenge posed by North Korea. Its implications are not only seen in Korea's relations with Washington and Beijing, but also in all aspects of Korean foreign policy and strategic thinking. So the attempt of this paper is to understand and evaluate the Korean strategic discourse against the background of the recently held Korean presidential election. While the strategic environment is becoming more challenging to Korean foreign policy, equally significant is the polarized nature of Korean politics. The lack of domestic consensus on crucial foreign policy issues between the conservatives and the progressives will also it's a factor that will influence Korea's strategic response to the changing strategic order in East Asia. So my presentations is divided into 4 parts. I'll briefly give a brief background of the Korean strategic outlook of Korean foreign policy. The second part, I will discuss about the US-China strategic rivalry and its implication for Korean foreign policy discourse. The third part will look into the Korean presidential election and the evolving strategic discourse in Korea, and briefly summarize the major findings in the conclusion. So, being an impoverished and a divided country, the Korea's strategic outlook in Korean foreign policy was determined by the structural condition of bipolarity during the Cold War period. During the Cold War period, Korean foreign policy was primarily defined by national survival in the face of communist threat, guided by a slogan, "A rich state and strong army," and constructing a strong anti-communist national identity. Managing alliance relations with the US was the focus of the Korean foreign policy in ensuring state security and facilitating conditions for Korea's economic transformation. The structural condition of unipolarity featuring US primacy in East Asia and the economic globalization that it brought with paved the new chapter in Korean foreign policy in the post-Cold War period. The relative absence of great power politics and the advent of globalization helped Korea to enhance its diplomatic and economic engagement with major regional powers, including China and Russia. It also helped Seoul to undertake an internationalist foreign policy agenda aimed at enhancing Korea's international status and economic prosperity. While some aspects of Cold War structure, including the US-Korea alliance, persisted in the Korean Peninsula in the wake of the North Korean nuclear challenge, a security threat that is emerging from North Korea continued to remain the most important strategic challenge in the Korean foreign policy outlook. Another important feature of the Korean foreign policy in the post-Cold War period has been its democratization. Following Korea's democratic transition, the democratization of Korean politics brought about a divide in the Korean politics between the conservatives and progressives over Korean identity fundamentally. It has its implications in the Korean foreign policy as well. The progressive political dispensation emphasizes independence and an autonomy in foreign policy outlook, despite maintaining an alliance relations with the United States. The divide between the conservative and progressives are more reflected in their respective approach to North Korea. While the conservatives have been following a hardline approach to North Korea, the progressives generally adopted an engagement policy. The US strategic rivalry and the Korean foreign policy outlook. The strategic competition between the United States and China has been an issue of concern for Korea, at least since the 2008 financial crisis. However, it has become a significant issue since 2018 with the intensification of the US-China confrontation. Viewing the development over the last 2 years, many Korean observers have convinced about the structural transformation of East Asian order. Many view that the US-China relations have deteriorated enough to be called a new Cold War. This includes this view is being shared by all the presidential candidates in the recently held election, making it a strategic challenge as equivalent to the North Korean threat. But as many of the previous speakers have said, the Ukrainian crisis, and there are a number of strategic thinkers in Korea who see Korea's position in the global geopolitical context as somewhat similar to the South Korean position between two geopolitical camps. Since its diplomatic normalization, Korea successfully strengthened its diplomatic and social and political engagement with China while maintaining its security alliance with Washington. The cordial relationship between Washington and Beijing was an important factor that helped Korea foster Korea's relationship with China. Korea viewed the rise of China as an economic opportunity. Subsequently, China became Korea's most significant economic partner. Over the years, China has emerged as Korea's most significant investment destination and on account, it accounts for about 1/3 of Korea's total trade. The status of the relationship is now defined as strategic partnership. So the maintaining a delicate balance between Washington and Beijing has been a running theme in the Korean foreign policy for over a decade. Since its inauguration in 2017, President Moon Jae-in openly said that he will pursue a balanced diplomacy. In many respects, Moon Jae-in's balanced diplomacy a sort of continuation of the kind of balanced diplomacy adopted by Park Geun-hye before him. The 2016 THAAD controversy was a case in point where the Korea's balanced diplomacy was tested for the first time. It revealed the linkages between the Korea's security and economic interests and the limitation of pursuing economic interests with China and security alliance with the US. The Moon administration managed to maintain a delicate balance by adopting the controversial 3-no position, which includes no additional THAAD deployment, no participation in the US-led strategic missile defense, and no trilateral military alliance with United States, involving United States and Japan. The 3-no position has been seen by the critics as a compromise on Korea's sovereignty and a security interest, and seen as an appeasement to China. The strategic dilemma in Korean foreign policy in the context of US-China strategic competition was also evident in Korea's muted and ambiguous approaches to issues like South China Sea, Belt and Road Initiative, and technological competition between US on issues like Huawei, and even on the Korea's approach into the Pacific. The Moon administration aggressively pursued diplomatic and economic diversification to enhance Korea's strategic autonomy along with its balanced diplomacy, and this diplomatic and economic diversification has been articulated through the new northern and the new southern policy. The Moon administration also took initiative to reduce Korea's security defense dependence on US by advancing the defense reforms, with the aim of achieving defense autonomy in the long term. While the Moon administration's North Korea-centric foreign policy is seen mainly as an end in itself, can also be viewed as an attempt to reduce Korea's strategic vulnerability in the context of US-China rivalry by establishing a permanent peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. And these aspects, this aspect has been an important part debate in the recently held Korean presidential election. In the South Korean presidential election held on March, the Yoon Suk-yeol of the Conservative People's Power Party was elected to replace Moon Jae-in. Yoon defeated the progressive candidate Lee Jae-myung of the ruling Democratic Party by a narrow margin of less than 1% of the total votes polled. As results have reflected it reflected the deeply polarized nature of the Korean politics between the conservatives and the liberals along the region. While both candidates agree that the strategic environment has significantly transformed with the intensification of US-China rivalry, addressing it will be a challenge.
Wind up.
Oh, sure, ma'am. Just give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
And the progressive and the conservatives were sharply divided over the legacy of Moon's administration, including the foreign and North Korean policy, with the Moon camp taking anything but a Moon attitude, while Lee was pledging continuity. During the campaign, under the vision of making Korea a pivotal power, Yoon has proposed a predictable foreign policy. He has been critical to the Moon administration's foreign policy for its North Korea centrism, China appeasement, and passive and ambiguous regional approach in the Indo-Pacific. He has been criticized for administration for its approach of strategic ambiguity, of not taking a principled stand on the issues of intense competition between Washington and Beijing, and for its silence on human rights issues in China. in its foreign policy approach, Yoon has proposed bolstering the strategic dimension of the alliance with the US with additional deployment of THAAD batteries and upgrading US ROK extended deterrence. He also proposed to reset the relationship with Beijing and adopted a proactive approach to the Indo-Pacific. Whether the candidate Yoon's the excessive statements on China will translate into foreign policy is something that remains to be seen. However, it's undoubtedly was an election strategy in the backdrop of rising anti-China sentiments in Korea, especially among the young voters, particularly that has a rise in the Beijing Winter Olympics. Considering the personal appointments in the transition team, who emphasizes on the US ROK alliance and a hawkish North Korean foreign policy, the strategic outlook of the incoming Yoon administration will be significantly different from that of the current Moon Jae-in administration. However, any radical revision of policy is easier said than done because of the polarized political climate, and surely will encounter opposition in the National Assembly, where the progressive still hold supermajority. Thank you.
Thank you, Joji. I think we had an excellent panel who have taken us through, navigated Taiwan to China to Japan and South Korea. I think we've really covered a large, plethora of areas also within these countries and the dimensions and issues that these countries face while they navigate the current scenario. There are quite a few questions on the chat box. It starts with, sorry, it's quite a few from the last. I think one, Avinash has already said that it's only a small part of his study with respect to Chinese cosmetic ban development. There's one question for Titli from Sudeep Kumar. Sudeep Kumar, could you want to yourself ask question? Or should I read it out?
Ma'am, I have read both the questions.
Okay, so if you would like to address it directly, but for the audience, let me just briefly say it is seeking to understand how was Abe's changing posture with respect to Taiwan security concerns, given the Ukraine crisis. And of course, given that he's in opposition to Kishida's faction, how does it play out in the domestic? And of course, the second question is with respect to if there is a fifth political document, what would be the issue of India, China, and Japan's relation? Over to you, Titli.
Right. Thank you for your. I hope I'm not muted. Right.
No, you are audible.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I would say that the change in stance, I don't know, because if you look at if we look at his position, I think it was in 2010 he visited Taiwan and met President Tsai. That time she was in opposition, but then he assumed office, and there are certain principles of one China policy that Japan adheres to. So, and the Taiwan situation in the last decade was probably not this urgent. So I would say that, the linkages was already there. And since we are seeing that President Xi Jinping's China dream is gaining more steam, so is the reaction. So I think there is escalation of activities around in the Taiwan Strait and also East China Sea, South China Sea, and hence the reaction that we are seeing that has come to the forefront and getting documented in all the white papers and policy discussions. In fact, policy speeches the leaders are making everywhere from G7 to other international forums. In terms of domestic politics, I think yes, factional politics does play a part. And, his foreign minister, Hayashi-san, is also known to be previously becoming foreign minister, had his affiliations, pro-China affiliations. His own half-brother, Kishi, who's the defense minister, is a well-known, Taiwan hand. So, and I think Abe has also mentioned that he wishes to visit Taiwan and show his respect to the late President Lee. So I think it is only getting mainstream. He's articulating his positions better because probably not he is in power. He has greater latitude, to talk about things and spark a debate. On the issue of the language of the fifth political document, this is, I think, the 50th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, of normalization of relations. But given the situation of the bilateral relation, the state of the bilateral relations, I really don't want to take my guess on what the language would be, given there are so many tensions between the two. And Avinash, Dr. Avinash has already in his presentation made mention about his, long-awaited visit, which then got delayed. There was some, in fact, within the LDP during that time, you may remember that there were certain, reservations about, inviting President Xi Jinping, given the human rights violation that was coming to fore. So there was a lot of internal debates that was going on, even in 2020 when he was supposed to come. And didn't materialize. So I wouldn't take my guess on the language of the fifth political document. And coming to Ambassador Khan's question about India, there are concerns in India that US preoccupation with the European theater post-Ukraine crisis may lead to reduced US focus in the Indo-Pacific, and are there corresponding concerns in Japan? I think if we look at some of the powerful voices, some of the influences, for example, Nobukatsu Kanehara, who was very closely associated with the National Security Council. He and others have been very vocal in arguing that this is time for the United States to not leave room for ambiguity, and it is time for the United States to demonstrate that it will actually come to Taiwan's defense in case of escalation of tensions in this theater. So they are seeking in no uncertain terms guarantees from the United States that in case of a Taiwan contingency, they would want US to make it very clear, because I think they believe that that will act as kind of a deterrent in terms of shaping China's behavior. And also, if we look at some of the political statements that are coming in the defense white papers, or even in the internal discussions, even in the foreign ministry, I think Japan itself is intensifying the debate. There is a lot of talk about setting legal frameworks in place, maybe not something similar to the Taiwan's Relation Act, maybe that is too far-fetched for Japan, but they are talking about not just, putting in place party-to-party relations. I think there is a trilateral that has come up, again, at a, not at the government level. You cannot have it at the government level, but intensifying discussions, and also, trying to figure out how to do intelligence sharing via the United States, and how they can facilitate in capacity building. There is discussion of missile deployments, possibility in the first island chains. So, kind of putting in place the frameworks in terms of, supporting Taiwan in terms of maybe not defense exports the way US does. Japan has its own limitations, but of course building Taiwan's capacity. I think Japan has articulated very categorically that in any contingency they do expect to get dragged in, and they are drawing up plans of joint operations in case of a contingency. So I think that is what is happening on the Japanese side, and what they expect from the US in case the East Asian theater also blows up.
Thank you, Titli. I think you've tackled both the questions well. I have Sachin Singh who's raised a hand. Sachin, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, I think Dr. Basu already answered quite a bit of my question.
Okay.
But still, I would like to ask, even from the first speaker or Dr. Basu herself, given Taiwan's current position here, I think the basic question is that of its contested sovereignty. And whatever is happening in Eastern Europe, we see that Ukraine was considered as a sovereign nation. Still, the Western capitals as well as the Washington decided not to intervene direct military, considering the nuclear world war or whatever excuse they gave. Do you think any, United States or Tokyo for that matter, if such a Taiwan contingency arises, what are the ways to go about it? Like Dr. Basu was mentioning, there is no Japanese version of Taiwan Relations Act, or there are some small steps being taken. But do you think unless this entire issue of sovereignty or perhaps its unification with China is considered, Taiwan can no longer rely on external support?
Who would like to take this question? Yeah, Prashant, go ahead.
Yeah, in my view, Taiwan's situation is far more vulnerable than Ukraine. As you said, that Ukraine is very much a sovereign country, and even then, it has not received as much support from NATO and America as many of us may be expecting. But in case of Taiwan, Taiwan is generally not considered as a sovereign country by and large by the world. It is not. So what has been protecting Taiwan? It is basically America's strategic ambiguity, and whether it is the main protagonist or the main underwriter of Taiwan security is basically America. And in our other analytical analyses, we can mention about Japan's role in case of a Taiwan contingency. That's a separate thing. So the point is, America and its allies would like everything possible, diplomatically, politically, and through capacity building, short of war, to deter basically Chinese threat. But in the ultimate situation of a Taiwan contingency, if China were to emulate Russia's example of invading Ukraine, so what course they will take, how much forward they will come to defend Taiwan, whether their commitment is just to deter Chinese threat or they have a commitment to defend Taiwan also. This is anybody's guess, basically, what will happen in that situation. But yeah, short of that, I think they will do everything at their power to deter the Chinese invasion. And as for the specific question of sovereignty, this is it has completely got different dimensions, and I don't think that there is any explicit commitment from any side towards this issue.
Thank you, Prashant. Titli, would you like to go in, or you have anything?
No, I don't have much to add, only to say that what I understand is that I don't think Japan is expecting any full-scale conventional war happening happening here, but probably some testing waters or testing the US commitment towards Taiwan in other theaters, like I think in the South China Sea they have the Dongsha Islands, which is under the control of Taiwan. So what happens if there is some escalation there, and how China may be testing US resolve there and then go ahead. So, this is what I could gather, and I have to add to what Dr. Prashant has said.
We have few minutes to go and no questions. So as a chair, can I just flag one more issue? We've been talking about other countries, but somehow the ASEAN centrality, which is something that we need to query. Any thoughts on that? Anyone from the panel on that? East Asia order and ASEAN centrality concept? Anyone who would like to answer? Avinash, Joji, Prashant, Titli, no one would like to get into this. It's again something. Yes, Sandeep.
Yeah, I have actually, you can say, not ASEAN Centrality. They may answer if they feel like. I have a question to both, like say, Titli and Jojin, and it's about actually North Korea. In actually, when we are discussing about East Asian strategic contour, it seems to me that maybe that my obsession with North Korea, but I think we quite little discuss, like say, North Korea. And why I'm saying, because North Korea, especially when I look at even like to Titli a specific question, that when Japan is reimagining its strategic role in East Asia, its relationship with not only North Korea, even South Korea has not been very good. And last administration, 2017 to till now, Moon Jae-in administration in South Korea, initially they had some problem, but then they tried multiple times to reach out Japan. But Japan was very adamant that, look, you first stop raising all those unpleasant things, then we are going to resume some meaningful talks. So I think if Japan is trying to reimagining something in East Asia, how could it be possible without, many scholars say that Japan doesn't have a North Korea policy. Then with South Korea, you don't have any relation. Let's say your relationship has not been very good in recent years. So how you are going to think about your role? And similarly, the question with Jojin is that in case of South Korea, when they are looking for their new role, their strategic autonomy doesn't mean that you create distance with not only your, you can say, competitors, but even with your friends, be it United States or say Japan. So how much he is hopeful that new president is Yoon Suk-yeol is going to be modifying that South Korean position. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Right. So you have raised a very pertinent question, and sorry, I did not have enough time. In 10 minutes, I had to talk about so many things. But yes, there can be no East Asian order without the peninsula, and we have seen things have not really worked out between Japan and both the Koreas, and this has been a huge headache for the US alliance system, because if two of your allies are not getting along, what we have seen is, I think it went for a downhill. The history issue, export controls came in place. There was a sideshow of trade war going on that we all missed because of the larger US-China that was going on. But yes, these are very serious issues, affecting both economics and geopolitics of the region. And I would say both Moon administration and since Abe, Prime Minister Abe came to power in December 2012, things have really been, I think, on a very slippery slope, and it has never picked up. It just snowballed in from one crisis to the other, to the time when it came to the intelligence agreement getting almost suspended, and US had to intervene. And I think it was, and with Trump presidency, both the allies had their own issues to deal with. So these three, the trilateral not being at their optimal best has also affected adversely the security situation in North Korea. And you may remember, sir, that even when the bonhomie was going on between inter-Korea relations, and also Trump's all the optics that we have seen in Singapore and subsequently in Hanoi, Japan was the only country left out. There was some diplomacy happening at all ends, except for Japan. So Japan also had kind of, I would say, lost out, because they could not have a direct communication channel with these very two important, countries. Also, I think Japan, with all due respect, I understand how important this issue and how close it is to their heart. But I think that even in the six-party talks, we have seen they're quite trapped in their abduction issues, bilateral issues, which kind of bringing them into the larger, regional security picture has also not really worked out. I am hopeful about the new incoming president Yoon in Seoul, because I was reading his foreign affairs article where he has argued in favor of at least trying a a reset in the relationship, which I think is absolutely indispensable for moving ahead, because I think we are seeing North Korea back in action. So I think, again, if Japan doesn't make efforts to reach out and have the communication channel open with the new administration, again, it is my fear is that, again, it will be left out to the mercy of the United States, to South Korea and others to communicate its message to North Korea. And I think as two US allies, this trilateral needs to work, not just work very effectively, work in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of interoperability also. The East Asian security order that you are talking about, it cannot happen without these two countries working together towards the denuclearization of the peninsula. Because you may remember, even when the Trump negotiations were happening, Japan again was left out by the United States because they did not talk about short-range missiles. I think Trump was too focused on intercontinental or security of continental homeland US. So again, there is no alternative to direct communication, and this has to break. And they have to bring their own issues to the high table instead of relying on other regional stakeholders who have their own calculations in the great power politics in the Korean Peninsula. So I kind of completely agree with you that without this relation being repaired, it's not going to be a different picture. Especially, it's very urgent given the North Korean, ballistic missile program is again gearing up, and every day I see, press releases from the Defense Ministry and even from Kante, but that is not going to, resolve the issue. I think alliance has to step up, and without South Korea, it's not going to happen.
Jojin?
I'll just add on what Titli mentioned about the Japan-Korea relations. I think there is positive statements from the president-elect of South Korea to improve Japan-Korea relations, but it also depends upon how Japan responds to it. So there is a reciprocity aspect to it. To add on what Titli said, there has been a perception developed in Japan over the years that it's a very difficult country to work with. I mean, at least from the Japanese strategic thinkers, that it's a relationship that is a country difficult to work with. Perhaps that perception needs to be changed. It also has to do with how the other dimensions of the new president's foreign policy, where the prioritization of Korean foreign policy. So if it's less of North Korea-centric engagement and more of alliance-centric and sort of assertive attitude with respect to China, there will be more outreach to Japan in terms of strengthening the bilateral as well as the trilateral security cooperation. That being said, given the Korean political scenario where the politics is very deeply divided, it's difficult for any Korean president to make compromises on issues which are very nationalist in nature. So, well, I mean, I suppose this is similar in the case of Japan as well, as to make any kind of concessions where the leader would not like to be seen as compromising on issues on which are very nationalist driven. It's also, well, I mean, Japan-South Korea relations in that sense involves multiple fractures. So it needs multi-layered approach to deal with this issue, and above all, there is a strategic competition between Japan and Korea, which is going on at the societal level also, which also add difficulty in finding a normal state in the kind of relationship between the two countries. Given the fact that this is to address the first question by Dr. Sandeep Misra about not to include North Korea. I mean, so I was given the focus of the US-China strategic competition, I was actually avoiding the North Korean aspect to it. So thank you.
Thank you. I do not see any more questions. So
let's say I may.
Okay, you want to continue the debate, please.
You raised a question. So I would like to say that, look, Southeast Asia has been a very important theater where all the East Asian countries, they have been competing. Suppose China, we know that how importantly through BRI and beyond BRI, they have been trying to invest in Southeast Asia. Japan is still, right now, we can say the foreign investment in developmental project. If you take that measure, Japan is the largest investor in Southeast Asia than China till now. So Japan has been trying to sustain. South Korea, they have also started ODI, and in their ODA, almost I think I don't know, maybe I think the largest percent goes to Southeast Asian country. And through new Southern policy, they have been trying to reach out Southeast Asia. North Korea also, they have specific countries with whom they are having very close connection. Indo-Pacific idea also, you know how, like say the September 2021 document talks about centrality of Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is important, and I think all the parties in East Asia, they are trying to be closer to Southeast Asia, take help from Southeast Asia, and basically play East Asian politics via some assistance from Southeast Asian country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me add to what Sandeep, Dr. Sandeep has said about the, the Korean approach to Indo-Pacific and the concept itself has been quite ambiguous. They have not endorsed the concept, nor, clarified their position on Indo-Pacific region or any other country for that matter. But the ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific has been the Koreans endorse only the ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific, which emphasizes in some way that the Koreans see themselves in a similar situation and identified with the kind of struggle that ASEAN is going through. So they all, if you look at the Korean approach to ASEAN through the New Southern policy, there is an attempt to sort of build rapport between ASEAN and sort of what you call a middle power constellation to deal with the great power geopolitics that is emerging in the broader East Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the debate is very interesting, and if it had been offline, probably it would have moved into the coffee table post-session. Since we do not have any more questions from the participants, it's my privilege to first thank all the panelists who have contributed significantly to a discussion, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing much about this over time. And I would like to thank ICS and Sivnadar again for giving this opportunity of building a forum which we would probably be able to engage more productively and come up with many more options of engagement. With that, I would like to hand it over to Surabhi, I suppose, as an ICS coordinator.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Allow me to conclude this session by thanking the chair, Professor Srabani Roy Choudhury, and the panel convener, Dr. Jojin V. John, and the panelists for joining us. This video recording of the session will be available at the ICS YouTube channel. We look forward to being joined by you all for the day 2 of the first All India Conference on East Asian Studies on 22nd March 2022. That's tomorrow at 900 hours. Thank you all for logging in. Have a great evening.